Welcome back to Anderson's Smoke Show. Today I've got a 17-pound whole brisket, and I've been studying some of the best briskets in the industry, and today I'm gonna take tips from all these different cooks and apply it to this brisket. You're not gonna wanna miss it because it's about to go down. If you're new here, my name is Andrew, and I'm an engineer, and everything that you see is gonna be technical and to the point, including this brisket cook and running my Char Griller Gravity 980 smoker. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell for notifications so that you can follow along with me all summer long. Now enough of the talking, let's get to brisketing. Now when it comes to brisket, the first thing that you need to do is kind of take a look at it and see what you're working with here. I've got a pretty big brisket, but there also is quite a bit of fat, and so I'm gonna need to trim and shape this thing appropriately. So let's get into it. First of all, the brisket is made of two different muscles. You've got the flat and you've got the point, and there are scientific names, but you don't need to know that today. We are going to trim this and just kind of round off the corners, and it's good to have a nice sharp knife, and it just helps you cut right through that with no problem. And I like to leave a flat edge on the front here because it kind of helps you recognize what it is when you get down to it. Now, there is a little bit of fat on this, so I'm just gonna take my knife, we're just gonna trim this back because there's no need for all that extra fat on top. And it helps to have a cold brisket because that fat in this meat's gonna be a little harder, and it's gonna make it a lot easier for you to trim this down. And I'm not gonna worry too much about the rest of this. That's no big deal. That'll render down nicely with everything else. Now on a brisket, you're gonna have an edge, and it's typically gonna be a really tough fat. The best thing for you to do is just cut that off. So that's what we're gonna do here. And that fat really doesn't render down, and it's tough, it's hard. You don't want to eat it. We'll just shape this a little bit. Now the meat that you see me cutting off, I'm gonna save that for other recipes, maybe chili, something along those lines. So don't worry, nothing's going to waste. Like I said, a good sharp knife is very important for this. And if you are in need of a good sharp knife, to be honest with you, I think I paid like 20 bucks for this one on Amazon, and I bought one of those little hand sharpeners. And honestly, you can't go wrong. You don't need some big expensive knife. Don't let people tell you differently. Just make sure you keep it sharp. Now I figure with a 17-pound brisket, I'm probably gonna be cutting off at least 2 pounds or so of fat and meat as I trim this down and shape it into the brisket that I've dreamed of. There's a lot of guys out there, they trim a mean brisket. You know, I'm no comp guy. I just like to cook and I like to eat, as you can tell. And so, cook to please yourself, cook to please your family and friends. Don't worry about anything else. Just learn from your experience, and no matter how good it is, always try to make it better the next time, because that is truly how you grow with anything, not even just barbecue. It's my little Anderson Smoke Show life tip right there. Okay, so you can see, got that trimmed down pretty good. We're gonna flip this over, and I like to trim up a little bit, but I don't wanna take off too much of that fat cap, because that fat is what's gonna help us render down. It's gonna keep this brisket nice and juicy. But this has a pretty thick fat cap, so I am gonna shave some of that off. sometimes if you lift the brisket up with your hand, you can kind of cause a hump, and you can use that hump to help trim a little bit. I can tell this brisket is starting to warm up a little bit because the meat's getting a little more pliable. Now it's time to season up this brisket. Now I'm gonna be honest with you. People have a tendency to say you don't need to season the bottom or the backside because of the fat and the rendering and everything. No, I wanna season this whole thing. Doesn't matter, you do what you do. And people use a mustard binder, people use no binder. I've got a little bit of duck fat, and I'm gonna spray it in my glove, and I'm not going crazy at all. I'm just gonna rub this on just so it's got a slight little shine to it. And that's just gonna help my rubs and my seasoning stick today. And really, that's just about all I wanna do over here. Now, for brisket seasoning. People are gonna tell you got all these big fancy rubs. You can use them, that's fine. It's all about your flavor profile. But for brisket and beef, really all you need is a little salt and pepper. So today, I'm gonna use some fresh, coarse ground pepper. I've got some coarse salt, and I am gonna touch it up with a little bit of the Meat Church Holy Gospel. Just a little bit, but it's not gonna be my main seasoning. So I'm gonna start with the salt, and this is coarse ground. It's hard to see on this white fat cap. You'll be able to see it a lot better on the top. All right. Now I've got some fresh, coarse ground black pepper. Now, just for a little bit of the Holy Gospel, and I'm just doing a little bit for some color, and just to fill in a little bit on the flavor. That's it. What I like to do, take the back side of my glove and just pat those spices in with that binder and that coarse ground pepper and salt. Pushing on it like this is gonna help it stick to that fat cap and to the surface of the meat just a little bit better. Now you're gonna see again what we're gonna do here, duck fat spray. Like I said, I'm not using a lot, just a little bit, just to give it a little shine. Now, some coarse salt. Coarse black pepper. And we're going to touch it up with the Holy Gospel, just a little bit. We take the back side or the top side of your glove, it don't matter. We'll just pat that on. Now that right there is a beautiful looking brisket. Now today we're gonna smoke it on my new Char Griller Gravity 980. I've already got this thing fired up, loaded up with some B&B and some hickory hardwood. It's time to get it in. Now I've got the Char Griller set to 225 degrees. It's been preheated, ready to go. As you can see, I've got one of my ThermoWorks ambient air probes in there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by putting the point towards the fire, and we might rotate it as it cooks. But I'm gonna start this right here in the center, just like so. Now, like I said, I've got some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I'm going to take a couple of my hickory wood blocks that I use for smoking. I'm actually gonna put it underneath the brisket so that it domes it up, and the fat as it renders can bead off rather than pooling or puddling on top. I grabbed a different piece of wood here. That other one was just a little bit too much. Now, as you can see, that brisket is laying nicely. That fat is going to roll off rather than puddle up on top. It's gonna be great. So let's get this thing closed. And honestly, we gotta let it go for hours. Until the surface starts to look dry, that's when we're gonna spritz it. This literally could be 2 to 3 hours. So I'll see you then. All right, long time no see. It is 6 hours in, it is 3:30 in the morning. I actually have not spritzed this brisket one time. The fat and the juices have kept the surface nice and moist, but it is time to get it out. We're at about 175 degrees internal temperature, which is a little higher than a lot of people pull it, but I wanted that bark to set up just a little bit more. So let's get this out. As you can see, it is looking great. All right, so one of the new trends with briskets is to use some beef tallow when we wrap it. This is something that I've seen multiple times on Mad Scientist Barbecue, so I wanted to give it a try and I wanted to show you what it's capable of doing. So I've got some beef tallow here, and I just want to get this onto the paper. We're just gonna spread it around, and we want it so that when we fold it over, it's gonna cover the top of the brisket, the meat side of the brisket. Now in his video, he uses the Wagyu tallow. That is not available at the moment, but I found some good organic tallow, beef tallow. We're gonna use that today. All right, so it looks like we've got about enough. So I'm gonna flip this over. All right, so we've got this brisket wrapped up. It's time to get it back into the smoker. I'm gonna get these probes back in, and don't worry about pushing them into the paper. It's not gonna hurt anything. All right, let's get this lid closed. All right, we've got the brisket back into the smoker. We are not gonna touch this again until we hit about 203 degrees, or when the probe feels like it's going into room temperature butter. We'll see you then. As you can see, it is a new day, and it's time to get that brisket out of the smoker. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let this brisket sit here until it cools down a little bit. I don't wanna put it in the cooler this hot because it's gonna continue to cook. We want this to get down to about 180 degrees. We'll see you in just a few. All right, we let this brisket rest until it hit 180 degrees internal. So now we need to transfer it to some new butcher paper, and then we're gonna wrap it and put it into the cooler for about 4 hours. Wow. All right, there you have it. Into the cooler we go for at least the next 4 hours. This brisket is rested for a little over 4 hours, and it's time to get it unwrapped and sliced up. Now, the rest period on briskets is something that people talk about all the time. Really, the rule of thumb is a minimum of 2 hours, but you kind of want to plan some wiggle room in. For example, we're eating at my parents' house in about 45 minutes, so I'm going to get this sliced up and take it directly over there. Now you can go as far as 12 hours if you want. Just use that rest period as a buffer time so that you can get to where you need to go and have your food ready on time. Enough of this talking though. Let's get this thing unwrapped and get it sliced. Now I can see it's still nice and juicy. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's get this thing sliced up. I'm gonna cut into the flat just a little bit like so. I'm gonna set this off to the side. We're gonna get a nice piece here. Oh yeah, that looks good. You can see that pulls apart nice and easily. It's got a nice smoke ring there. All right, all that work means nothing until we taste it. So I'm gonna get me a piece of that point. Slice this just a little bit more. Got me a chunk of that point. That's good and tender, super juicy. And we'll get into that flat there. You can see it's got a nice smoke ring there. Nice smoke ring. Give it a try. Now I noticed on that char griller, that's the second time that I've cooked on it, I feel like the temperature might be a little bit off. It's something that I've got to investigate because this cooked a little faster than I think it should have, but honestly, it turned out just great. Coming up in a follow-up video, I'm gonna do an experiment with the temperatures. We'll see how that turns out. And if you wanna see more awesome videos, more barbecue, more technical overviews of grills, then be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time at Anderson Smoke Show. Sitting here editing the video, I realized that there's some things about this brisket that I should have talked about. The whole basis of this video was using some tips and tricks across the board, and I never really addressed that in the taste test or at the end of the cook. First would be using wood to prop up the brisket to create a dome shape. That really helped prevent any puddling of those juices as the fat rendered down, and it helped establish an awesome bark. So that is something that I will use with every brisket that I make from here on out. The second thing, that's gonna be the beef tallow. To be honest with you, it turned out really great. Now I've seen people who actually add more beef tallow when they wrap it and put it into the cooler. I think the next time I'm gonna try that as well, but it honestly turned out great. Now, in the video, I just told you about how the temperatures I think were a little bit off, and I'm gonna come clean about one thing. I ran my ambient air probe and I noticed that the grill was colder than what it was set for, so I adjusted the temperature. But what I found out afterwards is that I made a mistake there. I talked to Char Griller and I told them that I think I've got some temperature fluctuations or some readings that are off, and they explained to me that though the probe is on the left side of the grill, actually what they do is they have an offset built in, so when the grill reaches equilibrium, so it's sitting there closed, running, the grates are hot, everything's in there and stable, the temperature that you're reading is offset so that it's reading what it should be in the center. And so what I had done, the grill had not reached equilibrium, I bumped the temperature up and I ran that brisket a little hotter than I should have. But that is the perfect reason why you should know how your grill runs. You should do some temperature tests, you should do some biscuit tests, you should run some probes in there from time to time. There's no true way to really know what's going on with your grill until you do those types of tests. And if you're gonna be investing in $80 cuts of meat like this prime brisket, it's honestly best to know that. With that being said, I did say that I'm gonna do a follow-up on the temperature test, and we are going to do an in-depth overview of the temperature. We're gonna look at some of the complaints that other YouTubers have had, and we're gonna see if they apply to me in my Char Griller Gravity 980. But until then, I'll see you next time at Anderson Smoke Show.